Correct. Good morning, students. So, welcome to the module 21, right, for the IC engine subjects. In the unit of diesel engine, today we are going to see about the types of the solid injection systems and the injection pump and the injector, right? So, how it will works, right? That we can see in this class, right? So, before entering this class, just we can recap what are the terms we discussed in last class. So last class we started the third unit, diesel engines, right? So what are the constructional features is there in the diesel engine? Then what is the difference between the SI engine and the C engine, that is petrol engine or gasoline engine to the diesel engines, right? So the differences, right? So in the constructional feature itself, we can see the most of the parts, most of the components are same for SI engine as well as the C engine, right? So the major difference is here in the diesel engine we are using the fuel injector instead of the spark plug, right? So why? Because uh, in the diesel engine, right? In the diesel engine, the only the air is compressed, right? Only the air is compressed. So due to the compression of the air, right? So it will increase the pressure as well as its temperature, right? Temperature is around 500 to 720 degrees Celsius, right? So that temperature, that heat is enough to ignite the fuel which is injected through the fuel injector, right? In the diesel engine we are using the fuel injector, right? But in the SI engines we are using the spark plug, right? Why? Because we have to generate the high voltage, we have to require the high heat, right? So while in the compression stroke the air and fuel mixture will compress us, right? So that compressor, while compressing the temperature will be increases, that heat will not be required, right? That heat will not be sufficient to ignite the air fuel mixture in SI engine. So we are using the spark plug to ignite the air and fuel mixture, right? But here the temperature, right? So the compression temperature is enough, right? So here the pressure, while in the compression stroke we can generate, its pressure will be around 28 to 70 bar, right? At the time it will develop the heat, right? It will develop the heat, it's around 520 to 720 degrees Celsius, right? So this heat is enough, right? This heat is enough to ignite the fuel, to ignite the fuel, right? So it is a sufficient temperature, it is a sufficient heat to ignite the fuel, right? So here we have to get the high pressure, right? So the compression ratio will be high, right? For the SI engine we are using the compression ratio as in the range of 6 to 10, right? But here the compression ratio will be more, right? So at the same time the fuel will be injected at high pressure, the fuel will be injected at high pressure, the pressure between the 100 to 200 bar pressure will be, sorry, the 100 and 200, between this pressure the fuel will be injected through the fuel injector, right? So here the fuel will be injected in a very fine droplets, right? So very fine droplets, so we are using that injector in a different systematic arrangements, right? So to get the different fine droplet, right? So why we are using this fine droplet? I mean, this fine droplet has to vaporize and it will take the heat, and it will take the heat from the compression stroke, right? It will take the heat from the compression stroke and the mixture will be burning. The combustible mixture has to start burning, right? So this is the fuel supply system for the CI engine, that is the compression ignition engine or diesel engine, right? So here the one more term, right? We have to note what is the ignition delay. It's a very important 2 mark question. You note that one. So uh, in the CI engine we are denoting as it is a ignition delay, but in SI engine we are denoted it is as a ignition lag for SI engine, and here for the CI engines it is the ignition delay, right? So it is a time period, right? It is a time period between when the fuel injector starts to inject the fuel, right? Starts off the injection, and when it will burning, when it will going to ignite, right? So the time gap between when the fuel injector injects the fuel and when the fuel gets ignites, right? So that time period is called the ignition delay. It's a one important 2 mark question. And for the high speed engines, the ignition delay will be 0.001 second, right? For the high speed engine. At the same time, the for the low speed engines, it will be 0.002 seconds, right? So at the time, it may have some crank rotation. It's around 25 degree of the crank rotation, right? It may around 25 degree of the crank rotation, right? So here one more point we have to remember. So the lesser ignition delay period, the lesser ignition delay period will improve, or we can get a better engine performance. We can get better engine performance, right? So this term we discussed in last class, right? Then what are the requirements? What are the requirements are needed in the fuel injection system, right? So here the one is a very important one is the accurating of the fuel has to supply, right? So the accurate amount of fuel has to supply for every cycle, right? So the metering device is very important one, right? The metering device is very important. Why? Because in the fuel injector injects the fuel in very limited, very fine, the small quantity amount, right? The small amount of the fuel will be injected through the injector, right? So the amount will be very small, right? So at the time we have to measure, we have to accurately see, we have to accurately monitor the fuel will be injected through the injector, right? So the accurate metering device is a very important one, right? Accurate metering is very important one, right? Then the accurate metering will be depends on the time of the injection, the timing of the injection, right? So what is the time, right? So what is the time to inject the fuel in the combustion chamber, right? So that timing is very important. That timing may increase the economic of the fuel and for the clean burning, right? So the timing of injection helps to ensuring the fuel economy and the clean burning, right? So at the same time we have to get a maximum power. At the same time we have to get some maximum power too, right? So these two are a very important one. And for the timing of the injection and accuracy of the meter, the proper control is very required one, right? Proper control is very required one, right? So proper control of the in injector, right? Proper control of the injector is very required one, right? Then the proper fuel droplets, the proper fuel droplets, that also a important one that will be obtained by the atomizer, right? That will be atomizer by the atomization process. Then the fuel spray, right? So how the pattern will be there, right? So that we have to see, and uniform distribution is required, and the equal amount of the fuel will be supplied through the every cycle, right? So equal amount of fuel will be supplied through the injector in every cycle, right? So that has to be noted, right? Then if it is in multi-cylinder fuel, if it is a multi-cylinder engine, right? So each cylinder we have to supply the equal amount of the fuel. Each multi-cylinder, each cylinder will have a separate injector, right? So all the injector has to be monitored, right? So that accurate metering device which has to monitor all the injectors, right? That we have to ensure, right? Then I already told that the delay period, right? So the delay period will gives a better performance, right? So the lesser delay period will gives the better performance of the engine, right? Then here we have to note, we have to eliminate the dribbling of the fuels, right? So when the dribbling will be occurs means either it may starting of the fuel injector or it may end of the fuel injection, right? So at the beginning and the end of the spray, right? So we can get some dribbling of the fuels, right? That we have to eliminate. That we have to eliminate. Then only the engine performance will be somewhat good, right? So these are all the functional requirements of an injection system. Then the classification, right? So air injection system and the solid injection system, right? So if if it is in a solid injection system, right, so we have to add some aid, right? We have to add some aid glow up devices, right? So if it is in air injection system, we are not using any glow up additions, right? So here we can see one by one. So in the solid injection system, we have four type of the injectors. Four type of the injection system will be there, that we can see, right? So before we are going to see about the types of the solid fuel injection system, just we can see what is the fuel feed system, right? What is the fuel feed system, right? So here we have plenty of components, plenty of parts, right? That's a very simple one, right? So what's the fuel tank? It is the storage one, right? So fuel tank is a storage one. Then what about the fuel feed pump, right? So feed pump, right? So generally the feed pump will supply the fuel from the tank to the injection system, right? So that is the function of the fuel feed pump. Then what about the injection pump? The injection pump will deliver the fuel, in the fuel uh, chamber, the engine chamber, right? So here we have two terms, right? One is the injection pump and the injector. The injector is supply the fuel to the system, that is the combustion chamber, right? So when always we have to supply the fuel in a particular pressure, right? So the where the particular pressure will be generated means by means of the injection pump. By means of the injection pump, we have to develop some pressure, and the pressurized fuel has to supply through the injector into the cylinder, right? So may note that. So what is the injection pump and what is the injector? Then obviously we know that what is the governor, right? So governor, right? So depending upon the load condition, depending upon the variety of the load condition and the speed condition, we have to supply the fuel. We have to supply the fuel, right? So the governor is to ensure the amount of the fuel will be supplied to the engine, right? So according to the various loads, as well as the various speeds, right? Then the filters, right? The fuel filters, right? So we have to supply a pure fuel into the system, right? So we have to remove all the dust by using the filters, right? So these are the components, right? These are the components, right? So then we can see how it will be works, right? It's working is very simple one. It's working is very simple one, right? So here it is a fuel tank, right? It is a fuel tank. The fuel has to supply through a tube into the plunger feed pump. Right? So what is the function of the plunger feed pump? Means it will slightly increase its pressure, right? So if it in the fuel tank, right, in the fuel tank it may get the pressure of the atmospheric pressure. The fuel tank will having the atmospheric pressure, right? So that atmospheric pressure is not enough to push the fuel into the engine cylinder through the injector, right? So we have to pressurize the fuel. We have to pressurize the fuel. You can see here, right? So we have to supply the pressurized fuel. We have to supply some pressurized fuel, right? So we have to increase the pressure, right? So we are using the plunger feed pump. We have to use the plunger feed pump, right? So from the plunger feed pump, again we have to supply a pressure regulator, right? So if the pump will develop some more pressure, right? So the required pressure is different. It will develop the pressure is different, right? So the excess pressure will be supplied to again the tank, and the required pressure will be goes into the fuel pump, right? Right. So here from the plunger pump to the pressure regulator, right? So in that pressure regulator, we have one more term, the fine filter, right? So here we are using the two types of filter. One is the coarse filter, one is the fine filter, right? So here we are using two types of filters. Then the fine filter, filtering all the dusters, right? Fine dusters also we can filter, right? Then it will, why we have to filter the fuels, right? So we have to prevent the dust or the abrasive particles from the fuel. It will be damages the engine. It will damages the engine. So we have to minimize the wear and tear of the component, right? So thereby we have to use the filters, right? So we are using the two types of filter. One is the coarse filter and one more is the fine filter, right? So the fuel tank, right? From the fuel tank, the fuel is supplied through the plunger feed pump, and here the pressure will be slightly increases, then the increase, that is the pressurized fuel, supplies to the pressure regulator valve, that is pressure relief valve, right? Pressure regulator or pressure relief valve, right? So here some pressurized fuel will be supplied to the fuel pump, right? Fuel pump, this component is a fuel pump, right? So here from the fuel pump, the pressure fuel has to supply the fuel injector, right? So here we have two components. So here it is the fuel pump and here it is the fuel injector, right? So here we have two parts. So one is the fuel injection pump, right? So here it is the pump. It is the pump, right? So why? Because so the pressurized fuel travels from here to here, right? So on the time its pressure may be varies, right? So its pressure may be varies. So we have to supply the pressurized fuel into the chamber, right? So here we have to use the pressure ignition pump and we have to supply the fuel through the nozzle. The nozzle is called the injector. The nozzle is called the injector, right? So the nozzle is called injector. So this system is called the fuel injection system. This system is called the fuel injection system, right? So here also we have to develop some pressure, right? So the excess pressure will be supplied to again the tank. The pressure excess will be developed in the fuel pump, in the injection pump, that has to be sent back to the fuel tank, right? So here the pressure will be a controllable one, right? So the fuel supplies in a fuel injector through the cylinder, right? So it is in a very regulative manner, right? So very regulative manner. So the controlled pressure has to supply, right? Controlled pressure of the fuel has to supply into the cylinder. Is it clear? Okay, is it clear? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, right. Then then we have to see the different type of the solid injection system, different type of the solid injection system, right? Right. So in the different type of solid injection system, we have four types of the solid injection system. We have four type of the solid injection system. So the first one is the individual pump, and the individual nozzle system, individual pump and individual nozzle system. And second one is the unit injector system, and third one is the common rail system, and fourth one is the distributor system, right? So here we have a four type of injection system, right? So in the diagram itself we can clearly we can see, right? So this diagram, so this one and this one, right? So both are the individual pump, both are the individual pump system. That is the first system, individual pump and the individual nozzle system, right? So we have to supply the high pressure fuel into the fuel injector, right? So we have to supply some high pressure fuel, right? So each cylinder, see here I mentioned here it is a two cylinder engine, right? So here it is a one cylinder and it is one more cylinder injector, right? So here we have cylinder, right? One cylinder and two cylinder, like that. The fuel supply system will be there, right? So in the here it is the fuel injector. It is the fuel injector. It is the fuel injection pump, right? It is the fuel injection pump, right? So from the fuel tank, we have to supply the low pressure, we have to supply the low pressure fuel, and the low pressure fuel has to supply into the pump, the fuel pump, right? So there we can generate some pressure, right? So we have to deliver the high pressure fuel into the fuel injector, right? So in this diagram you can see, so how many pumps are there? You can see here the plunger, right? So in the plunger feed pump, we have to increase slightly high pressure. So it is called as the low pressure pump. It is called as the low pressure pump. Then the low pressure pump to, we have to supply the fuel into the fuel pump, right? In that fuel pump, we have to generate some high pressure fuel. We have to generate some high pressure fuel. Again, this high pressure fuel has to supply to the injector injection pump, right? So here we are using the three types of pumps, right, in the fuel feed system, right? So one is the plunger feed pump, that is a low pressure pump, and the fuel pump, that is some high pressure pump, and the injection pump, right? So here the function of the injection pump is the two functions, right? So one is we have to supply the pressurized fuel into the system, and we have to supply the amount, right? So we have to supply the particular amount of fuel, right? So the metering system also controlled by the injection pump, right? So here you can see, so we have here the low pressure pump, that is the plunger feed pump, right? So from the plunger feed pump, we have to supply the fuel into the fuel pump, right? So here we can generate the high pressure fuel, and the high pressure fuel will be supplied to the injection system, right? So it is the injection system, and it will be connected to the injector, right? So it is one type of the injection system. So here you can see, so each inductor will have the each pump, each inductor will have the each pump, right? So here it is denoted as the individual injector will have the individual pump, right? And that is the injector, here it is not noted as a nozzle system, right? So the each nozzle system will have the individual pump, right? So it is one type of the solid injection system, right? So here the arrangement is different, that's all, right? So from the figure A and the figure B, so what is the difference? So here you can see the pump will have the separate space, right? So the pump will have in a separate space, but here the pump will have in a single uh, one particular place, right? So but the pump is different, right? So here you can see the two types of pump, right? So the individual injector will have individual pump to deliver, right? So the here you can see, right? So these pumps are in separate manner, right? So these pumps are in separate manner, right? So if the pumps are together, that is called as the cluster, right? So if the pump will be in same place, that place is called as cluster, right? So you have to note that the individual pump will have the two times, right? So one is the separated pumps, and or in a cluster form, pumps in the cluster form, right? So both are same, the working are the same, right? Then the second one is the unit injector system, and second one is the unit injector system, right? So here also you can see the low pressure pump, right? Here also you can see the low pressure pump, and from the low pressure pump we have to supply the fuel into the injection pump, right? So in the injection pump we have to get the high pressure oil, we have to get the high pressure fuel, right? So uh, in this diagram you can see here, from the injector pump, the fuel has to uh, supply in high pressure, right? So the high pressure fuel will be supplied in the injector. So the excess pressure will be developed or will be goes through into the fuel tank, right? So that setup will be here, you can see. So from the fuel, low pressure fuel is goes into the fuel pump, right? That is the injection pump, and the excess pressure will be comes into the fuel tank. Is it clear? Right. So this type of here you can see what we are eliminating the high pressure pumps, right? We are eliminating the high pressure pumps, right? So here the injection pump will be used as to generate the high pressure, right? So in the unit, right? So in the unit injector system, so the every injector will have a injection pump. That injection pump will be used to develop the high pressure fuel. That injection pump will supply the high pressure fuel, right? So this type of injection system is called the unit injection system, right? Then the common rail system, right? So the difference between the unit injector and the common rail, right? So here you can see, so from the low pressure pump, we have a separate lines. We have separate lines for the each cylinders. We have separate line for the each cylinder. But in the common rail system, the high pressure, right? The high pressure pump will supply the fuel in a common header. From the common header, which is connected into the each nozzle or each injector, right? So the high pressure fuel will be supplied in a common header system, that the common header will be connected into individual injectors, right? So this type of fuel system, this type of the fuel supply system is the common rail system. And the fourth one is the distributor system, right? So in this distributor system, so the distributor will have a rotor, that is the rotating device, right? So the high pressure fuel will be supplied in the, see the high pressure, right? The high pressure fuel will be supplied into the distributor. That distributor is connected through the uh, individual injector, right? So while the distributor rotating, so what will happen? So the high pressure fuel will be connected in a particular line, right? So that type of system is called the distributor system, right? So here you can see the distributor having the different outlets, right? The distributor having the different outlet, right? So like this. So for example, it is the distributor, right? So here I have a port, right? So it is for the first cylinder, and it is for the second cylinder, and it is for the third cylinder, and it is for the fourth cylinder, right? So what will happen means the distributor will have a nozzle, right? So the fuel supply system, right? So if the, it will be rotates, right? So if the rotor will rotate the distributor, what will happen? So it will be connected in this line. So the fuel will be supplied to the first system, right? So again it will be rotates. Then the fuel will be supplied to the second and third one, and for the fourth one, right? So the high pressure fuel will be supplied through this distributor, right? This distributor, and it will be supplied to the individual cylinders, right? So this type of the solid injection system is called the distributor system, right? Then we have a comparison statement. We have some comparison, right? So how the metering will be there, right? So either it may be a valve or it may be a pump, right? So how we can control, right? So for first term, right? So how we can control the fuel, right? By the pump or the valve, right? So in the common rail system, we have to control the fuel supply by the injection valve. But in the remaining cases, either in the unit injector system or the distributor system or individual pump and nozzle system or the air injection system, the metering will be in the pump, right? So the injection pump, right? So here we can see the injection pump has to meter, and we have to pressurize the fuel, right? So we have to meter and we have to pressurize the fuel to the injector, right? So the injection pump, right? So here either it may be controlled by the injection pump or the injection valve, right? Then the timing, right? So most of the timing chains will be in the form of the cam, right? So when the valve will be opened, when the valve will be closed, right? So that will be you might have known, right? So all you might have known what is the timing chain, right? So the timing chain will controls the valve by using the cam, right? So most of the timing will be controlled by the cam operated mechanism, right? So here, so most of the systems will be controlled by the fuel cam, but in the individual we are having only the pump cam, right? So remaining and all we have a fuel cam. Then the fuel injection rate, right? So the amount of fuel will be supplied through the injection nozzle, right? So how it can be uh, differs, right? So the spray valve, right? So the spray valve, and it will this will be uh, we will discuss in upcoming slides, right? So what is the injection pump or a nozzle? What is the injection pump or a nozzle? Right. So here we have two types of injectors, two types of the nozzles, right? So one is the jerk type pumps, right? So most of the engines we are using this type of the fuel injector, right? So the fuel injection pump will be the jerk type fuel pumps, right? So what is the fuel injector? The fuel injector means you can see it is a fuel pump and it will be connected through the tube, and we have a nozzle, and here we have a spray system, right? So here this system is called the fuel injection pump and it will be called as the fuel injector, right? So the fuel injector means the nozzle. The fuel injector means the nozzle output, right? So how the nozzle will be works, right? So this setup is called the fuel injection system. This setup, right? So addition of the fuel injection and the fuel injector nozzle, right? So this setup is called the fuel injection system, right? So first we can see what about the fuel pump, then we can see the nozzle, right? So first we can see the fuel injection, right? So first we can see the jerk type, right? So these are the jerk type. These are the jerk type pump, fuel injection pump, right? So it is also called as the Bosch fuel pump, right? Because of the Bosch company will have patent rights for this fuel injection pump, right? See, here we have ports, right? So A port and C port and the B port also there, and then B port, right? So the fuel supplies into the A port. The fuel will be supplies into the A port, and here we have a plunger, right? This one is as a plunger, right? See here it is the plunger. It is the plunger. It will be reciprocates, right? The plunger will be have the reciprocates, right? In this direction, the plunger will be moves, right? So the plunger will be connected to the rack system. The connected to the rack system, right? So once it will be reciprocate in up and down direction, the plunger rack rotation, the plunger movement will be in this direction, in sideways direction. In this direction it will move. இப்போ புரிஞ்சப்ப இது எப்படி இருந்து இந்த பிஸ்டன் ரைட்டா அந்த பிளஞ்சர் இருந்து மேலேயும் கீழே மூவ் ஆச்சு அப்படின்னா இங்க கீழே இருக்கக்கூடிய இந்த ரேக் அப்படின்றது நம்மளுக்கு சைட் பேஸ்ல மூவ் ஆகும். இந்த மாதிரி சிஸ்டம் எங்க பாத்துருக்கீங்களா? இந்த மாதிரி அரேஞ்ச்மெண்ட் எங்க பாத்துருக்கீங்களா? இந்த மாதிரி அரேஞ்ச்மெண்ட் எங்க பாத்துருக்கீங்களாப்பா?
அந்த வீலோட ஸ்டியரிங்
எங்கப்பா?
இந்த கார்ல பாத்துருக்கேன்.
கரெக்ட். இப்போ நம்ம வந்து வீல் ஸ்டியரிங் இருக்கு இல்லையா? ஸ்டியரிங் நம்ம ரொட்டேட் பண்றது என்னது? நம்ம வந்து இப்படி ரொட்டேட் பண்றோம், ரைட்டா? ஸோ ரொட்டேட் பண்ணக்கூடியது டயரோட மூவ்மெண்ட் பார்த்தோன்னா எப்படி இருக்கும்? ஒரு ரேக்ல வச்சிருப்பாங்க. அது பாத்துருக்கீங்களா அந்த செட்டப்? நம்ம லேப்ல கூட இருந்திருக்கும் அந்த மாதிரி செட்டப்ஸ்.
எஸ் சார்.
ரைட். ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி தான் ரேக் மூவ்மெண்ட், ரைட்டா? ஸோ இந்த பிளஞ்சர்ன்றது நமக்கு வந்து மேலே கீழே மூவ் ஆயிட்டு இருக்கும். ஸோ அதுக்கு எது மாதிரி அந்த சைட் ரேக்ன்றது சைட்ல நமக்கு ரேக் மூவ் ஆயிட்டு இருக்கும். ஸோ இங்க போட்டுருக்கேன் பாருங்க, ரைட்டா? ஸோ இந்த ரேக்கோட மூவ்மெண்ட் பார்த்தா எப்படி இருக்கும்? இந்த டைரக்ஷன்ல தான் எனக்கு ரேக்கோட மூவ்மெண்ட் இருக்கும், ரைட்டா? சைட் வைஸ் டைரக்ஷன்ல ரேக் மூவ்மெண்ட் இருக்கும், ரைட்டா? ரைட். ஸோ ஒன்ஸ் இந்த ரேக் மூவ்மெண்ட் எதை பேஸ் பண்ணிருக்கு? இந்த பிளஞ்சரோட மூவ்மெண்ட்டை பேஸ் பண்ணிருக்கு, ரைட்டா? ஸோ அப்வர்ட் டைரக்ஷன்ல போதா இல்லை டவுன்வர்ட் டைரக்ஷன்ல போதான்னு, ரைட்டா? ஸோ ரைட். So here we have the fuel will be supplied into the A port, right? Fuel will be supplied into the A port, right? So once the A port supplies, when the fuel will be enters into the A port, the plunger வந்து இப்போ downward directionல பென்ல மூவ் ஆயிட்டு இருக்குன்னு அர்த்தம். அப்போ என்ன ஆகும்? இந்த supplies fuel வந்து இந்த டைரக்ஷன்ல சக் பண்ணிக்கும் fuels, ரைட்டா. ஸோ ஒன்ஸ் இது வந்து என்ன பண்ண லிமிட் பண்ணி வச்சிருப்பாங்க, இது வந்து லிமிட் பண்ணி வச்சிருப்பாங்க ரைட்டா. ஸோ ஒன்ஸ் இது மூவ் ஆயிடுச்சு அப்படின்னா மறுபடியும் என்ன ஆகும், ரிட்டர்ன் வரும்போது பிளஞ்சர் என்ன ஆட்டோமேட்டிக்கா மேலே மூவ் ஆகும் ரைட்டா. ஸோ பிளஞ்சர் மேலே மூவ் ஆகும்போது பார்த்தோன்னா வந்து இந்த ஏ போட்ட பிளஞ்சர் க்ளோஸ் பண்ண ஆரம்பிக்கும் ரைட்டா. ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி வந்து பார்த்தோன்னா வந்து அதோட சைடு வால்ஸ் வந்து க்ளோஸ் பண்ண ஆரம்பிக்கும். இதுக்கு நெக்ஸ்ட் கிளாஸ் ஒரு அனிமேஷன் காட்டுறேன் இது ரைட்டா. ஒரு அனிமேஷன்ல எப்படி வந்து ஒர்க் ஆகுதுன்ற அனிமேஷன் உங்களுக்கு காட்டுறேன். பட் இப்போ இந்த கிளாஸ் மட்டும் என்ன பண்றீங்க, இது ஜஸ்ட் எப்படி இருக்கு மட்டும் பாத்துக்கோங்க, செட்டப் எப்படி இருக்குது மட்டும் பாத்துக்கோங்க. நெக்ஸ்ட் கிளாஸ் உங்களுக்கு அனிமேஷனே இது காட்டுறேன் எப்படி ஒர்க் ஆகுன்றது ரைட்டா. ரைட். ஸோ இங்க பாத்தீங்க அப்படின்னா இந்த ஃபியூல் இந்த வழியா உள்ள வரும் ரைட்டா. ஸோ பிளஞ்சர்ல இந்த வழியா உள்ள போயிட்டு மறுபடியும் என்ன ஆகும், இந்த ஃபியூல் வந்து பிளஞ்சர் புஷ் பண்ணும்போது இந்த பீன்ற போர்ட்ல பார்த்தோன்னா வந்து வால்வ் ஓப்பன் ஆகும் ரைட்டா. அந்த பீன்ற போர்ட் என்ன பண்ணிருப்பாங்கன்னா ஒரு ஸ்ப்ரிங் வால்வ் வச்சு கனெக்ட் பண்ணிருப்பாங்க ரைட்டா. இங்க தெரியுதா உங்களுக்கு ரைட்டா. ஸோ இந்த இடத்துல பார்த்தோன்னா இந்த வால்வ் அப்படின்றது ஒரு ஸ்ப்ரிங் வச்சு கனெக்ட் பண்ணிருப்பாங்க ரைட்டா. ஸோ ஒன்ஸ் நான் பிளஞ்சர் புஷ் பண்ணும்போது ஆட்டோமேட்டிக்கா எனக்கு என்ன ஆகும், ப்ரெஷர்ன்றது இன்க்ரீஸ் ஆகும். ஸோ டியூ டு த ப்ரெஷர் இன்க்ரீஸ் ரைட். ஸோ டியூ டு த ப்ரெஷர், ஸோ வாட் வில் ஹேப்பன், தட் ப்ரெஷர் will exert some force ரைட். அந்த ப்ரெஷர் வந்து என்ன exert some force and the force lift the spring ரைட்டா. ஸோ அந்த ஃபோர்ஸ்னால நமக்கு என்ன ஆகும், இந்த ஸ்ப்ரிங் வந்துறது மேலே லிஃப்ட் ஆக ஆரம்பிக்கும். ஸோ எனக்கு இங்க இருக்கக்கூடிய வால் வந்து ஓப்பன் ஆகும், இங்க இருக்கக்கூடிய பீன்ற போர்ட்ல இருக்கக்கூடிய ஆரிஃபைஸ் வால் வந்து ஓப்பன் ஆகும். ஸோ இந்த வழியா எனக்கு என்ன ஆகும், ஃபியூல் வந்து வெளியே போகும் ரைட்டா. ஸோ இதுதான் என்ன ஆகும், இந்த சப்ளை ரைட்டா. இந்த அவுட்லெட் பேசேஜ் இருக்குல்ல, இந்த அவுட்லெட் பேசேஜ்ன்றது இதுதான் ஒரு ஆரிஃபைஸ். இட் இஸ் த ஆரிஃபைஸ் ஆஃப் த அவுட்லெட் பேசேஜ் ரைட்டா. ஸோ அந்த பேசேஜ் வழியா எனக்கு என்ன ஆகும், ஃபியூல்ன்றது ஸ்ப்ரே ஆகும் வெளியே கரெக்டா. ஸோ this type of the injection pump is called the jerk type injection system right. So இந்த இதுக்கான animations ஒன்னு காட்டுறேன் right. Right. So once the plunger will be against, it will be comes into the downward direction. So இங்க excess இருக்கக்கூடிய amount இருக்கு அப்படினா கூட அந்த excess amount will be passing through the C port. Again it will be goes to the tank. Again it will be goes to the tank right. So மூணு போர்ட் இதல ஞாபகம் வச்சுக்கோங்க right. So A port, B port and C port right. So fuel inlet will be A port, அதே மாதிரி ஃபியூல் அவுட்லெட் சி போர்ட். ஸோ இந்த ஒர்க்கிங் ஃப்ளூயிட் ஸ்ப்ரே நாசலுக்கு எங்க போகும் பார்த்தோன்னா வந்து பி போர்ட் வழியா போகும் கரெக்டா. ஸோ இது பி வழியா போறது என்ன பண்ணிருப்போம், எஃபெக்டிவ் ஸ்ட்ரோக்னு சொல்லியிருப்போம் ரைட்டா. ஸோ எஃபெக்டிவ் ஸ்ட்ரோக் அப்படின்னு என்னது, குவான்டிட்டி ஆஃப் த ஃபியூவல் இன்ஜெக்டட் அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம் ரைட்டா. பி போர்ட் வழியா போகக்கூடிய அவுட்லெட் பேசேஜ் வழியா போகக்கூடிய ஃபியூல் தான் சொல்லிப்போம் எஃபெக்டிவ் ஸ்ட்ரோக் என்ஸ் குவான்டிட்டி ஆஃப் த ஃபியூவல் இன்ஜெக்டட் அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருப்போம் கரெக்டா. ரைட். ஸோ இதுக்கான அனிமேஷன் உங்களுக்கு நெக்ஸ்ட் கிளாஸ் காட்டுறேன் ரைட்டா. ஸோ இந்த கிளாஸ் இது வரைக்கும் உங்களுக்கு ஸ்டாப் பண்ணிடுறேன் ரைட்டா. நெக்ஸ்ட் கிளாஸ் உங்களுக்கு அதுக்கான அனிமேஷன்ஸ் காட்டுறேன், இந்த டிஸ்ட்ரிபியூட்டர் டைப்பும் சரி இந்த ஃபியூல் இன்ஜெக்டர் பம்பும் சரி ரைட்டா. ஸோ நெக்ஸ்ட் கிளாஸ் என்ன பண்ணலாம், இந்த ஃபியூல் இன்ஜெக்டருக்கான அனிமேஷன்ஸ் பார்த்துட்டு the injectors ரைட்டா, that we can see in the next class. Is it clear? Do you have any doubt in this class?
No sir.
No sir.
Okay, right, fine. டேய் அதே மாதிரி இந்த 2022 குரூப் இருக்கு இல்லையா, 2022 மெக்கார் 18 ஒரு குரூப் இருக்கா, அந்த குரூப்ல யாராச்சும் இல்லாம இருக்கீங்களா? Why? Because ஸோ இப்போ நெக்ஸ்ட் உங்களுக்கு 6th அவர் என்ன